feels like everyone and their mum has a Patreon account for their podcast, whereby they ask and solicit for listener donations. How does that feel to you? Should you be doing that for your podcast? Well, let's dig into that today here on the Podcast Accelerator. I'm your host, Mark Asquith, CEO and founder of Rebel Base Media, where we make podcast technology, including Captivate.fm, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host. And I want you to go and check Captivate out, because not only is it going to make it easy to start and grow your podcast, not only does it make it easy to distribute your podcast to Apple, Spotify, and Google, and the rest of the directories, but we have a suite of unique and highly innovative tools to help you to market your podcast, including our single subscription link, our one-click sponsor kit, and our very, very exciting collections feature to help you to create, I guess, a bit of excitement around your back catalogue, all right? Attract new listeners every day with Captivate.fm. Go and get 7 days on us, all right? So we are going to talk about Patreon for podcasts in just 1 second. Should you have a Patreon for your podcast? I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Patreon is, and we're going to get into that, okay? But before I do that, huge shout out to the team at Aweber who helped me to run this podcast. And the way that they help me to run that is by making it very, very easy for me to capture your email addresses in a very positive, safe, GDPR, CCPA compliant way. So all creators need a way to capture their email addresses of their audience so that they can build relationships and eventually monetize that audience. Aweber does just that for me, all right? And I believe it's the easiest and most friendly way to do the very same thing for yourself. So please go and check Aweber out on markasquith.com/Aweber. Now, what the heck is Patreon? Patreon is a platform that allows you to set up a private area for people who pay you, aka fans and advocates, who pay you a predetermined amount of money per month in exchange for added value, okay? So artists use this, video producers use this, creators from all over the world use this, and podcasters in particular are making great use of Patreon. We use it for our Spark of Rebellion podcast, which is our Star Wars podcast. It's a little hobby that we've got, and we use Patreon to generate our hosting costs even before we had launched. Even before we had launched. That's right, let that sink in. Before we had launched our podcast, we had enough listener support through donations every month to cover our own podcast hosting costs with Captivate.fm. That's pretty badass, right? So, should you set a Patreon up? Yes, you absolutely should for your podcast, okay? You should, because it's a way for your fans to give back. And believe me, you have fans, and fans want to give creators that they love a lot back in return. They appreciate you. They're used to you being there, and they want to give you something back to recompense some of your time. Now, it feels a little icky. It feels a little bit like, oh, do I want to be taking money from my listeners? Well, you know, ultimately you do this as a labor of love, and as with most labor, you know, you kind of want something back in return. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. You get a little bit bored of it, perhaps, or it becomes too much of a time suck. If you can do something to engage your listeners, then yes, you should be doing it. So yes, you should set up a Patreon, and it's very, very easy to do so. You know, just go to patreon.com and sign up. We integrate with Patreon, with Captivate.fm. We make it very, very easy for people listening to you to go over to Patreon and start to donate to you. We work with them very, very closely on that, and we also make it very, very easy for you to get that set up in your Captivate podcast hosting dashboard. So please go and do it. Go and steal what we do is Spark a Rebellion. It's not a huge Patreon account. It's like $50 a month or something. It's not anything really to write home about. But it pays for the hosting and beyond. It pays for a little bit of editing or a VA to do some work for us on the podcast, all right? So it's a great thing to do. Please go and check it out, all right? Patreon.com/Spark of Rebellion is ours. You can copy that. On the last episode, I spoke about how you price your offer for Patreon. And the thing that I want to just reiterate with that on this episode is that people are going to give you money in return for lots of value, okay? So whether that is merchandise or access to other content or gated content, premium content, ad-free content, bonus episodes, live Q&A, Slack groups, Facebook groups, academies, workshops, tutorials, guest interviews, extras on the back of guest interviews, bloopers, behind-the-scenes chats with you. Like, there's so much that you can do with this, and Patreon facilitates it all, okay? And it integrates beautifully with Captivate.fm podcast hosting. So please, today, yes, you should have a Patreon, okay? Any podcaster that is doing this as a creator that is trying to do something through that podcast should do a Patreon for it, all right? Because listeners will come to you saying, how can I help? And if you can say, well, do you know what, actually, just buy me a cup of coffee at $5 a month or buy me a cup of coffee at $5 one-off, they will do it. So the answer to the question, should you have a Patreon for your podcast, is without a doubt a huge, resounding yes. And I want you to go get started with that today at patreon.com. Sign up as a creator. Now, we will be putting a few courses together in the academy on this, Patreon for podcasters. So watch out. podcastsuccessacademy.com is our free academy where we put a lot of content about just learning podcasting and educating. And of course, we will be doing this for Patreon as well. So check it out, Podcast Success Academy. Now, if you're looking for more podcast monetization ideas, which of course you are, we all are, go and check out the blog that we are basing all of our podcast content on for the next few weeks. You can do that at captivate.fm/money. It's a hugely in-depth 15 ways to monetize your podcast today. Go and check that out. That's a fantastic blog post that the team put together. And I really want you to take heed of some of the words in there, some of the advice. That's captivate.fm/money. And if you need a hand, hit me up in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. If you are one of my hyper-loyal podcast listeners in the podcast app of your choice, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. As always, it really makes a big difference that I know you're there and I get the emails back. If you need me, email me. You've got my email address, those of you that know how to get a hold of me. If you don't have my email address, ask for it. Hit me up at Mr. Asquith on Twitter. And if anything crops up that I can help with, please just let me know, all right? So until the next time, thank you for joining me. And never, ever, ever forget, the more you expect from yourself, the more you will excel.